guys, welcome back to another episode of Complex Like Wine, the podcast where we talk about complicated things and improve over time, just like wine does. We have another fellow podcaster joining us today, and we have Scott with us. Before we get into all of that, Scott, what are you drinking?
I first of all, I made a special purchase just to make sure I had something. I don't keep a lot of alcohol in my house because I drink it, and that's the easiest way to not drink every night is to not have it in my house. But in the spirit of complex like wine, I do have whiskey, but I put it in a little wine glass here for you. This is
Oh, that's cute.
High West Double Rye from Utah, and it's one of my favorite whiskeys.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my brother's a big whiskey guy, so I'll definitely remember to show him that one next time.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, I have in a cup my little thing, but I'm having a Pinot Grigio from the Madalena brands from the Santonio Winery. That's where I used to work. But yeah, that is what I'm having. So cheers.
Cheers. Into the camera. Cheers. And in the name on in the style of wine mean next to nothing to me. I'm not a big connoisseur of wines, but I will also maybe check that out later if they offer it over here in Chicago.
Yeah, yeah. No. Yeah, wine's not for everybody, which I totally get. So I appreciate you buying some whiskey to join me.
Oh, I don't need an excuse to buy the whiskey. It was nice to have an excuse.
Well, guys, so Scott has his own podcast, and I'll let him kind of go briefly into explaining it because if you want to get the whole backstory of how his podcast came to be, I'm going to link his first episode. I listened to it and I literally my entire car ride. I'm glad the timing was perfect for my whole commute home, but yeah, I was glued to just listening. Anyway, I don't want to give away too much, but Scott, I'll let you introduce yourself, your podcast, and kind of why we're here.
Yeah, well, first that was super sweet. Thanks for the plug. And I my podcast is called Positively Terrible, and the reason it's called Positively Terrible is because I had some traumatic events that were terrible that I decided to make something positive out of. So I thought it was a clever name. I wish I could take credit for naming it, but my partner, producer Dan, is the one who came up with the name. I'm still mad at him for it, but it's a beautiful name, so I like it. But the my journey started a few years back during the pandemic, and I was pretty highly depressed. I was alone. Nobody, I was working from home. It was freezing cold in Chicago, and I couldn't go outside. We were on lockdown basically, but then we couldn't leave the houses because of the cold as well and the snow. It's hard to get my car out. So I was home alone. I was depressed, and I was alone because my wife was allegedly working a lot. And I soon found out that that wasn't the story. I had always had some suspicions about her behaviors and actions and why she couldn't be around at certain times. And then she had what I like to call a suspicious car accident. And through that car accident and looking at the claim, the details didn't match what she told me. And I ended up unraveling a mystery and found a man who she called her fiance, or he called her his fiance, and another man that was her boyfriend. And the three of us ended up at a bar, and that was kind of the culmination of a whole lot of shit. And suddenly everything made sense. It ripped the band-aid off. I was able to divorce her, understand that there was nothing that I could have done in my life to make her happy. And honestly, it was a terrible thing. But the way that it happened also made me comfortable with it being the end. So from there, I'd been in therapy for a few months, and I was only able to follow those leads because of the strength that I was getting from therapy. I've continued therapy for the couple years since then. I've gotten stronger, I've gotten happier, and I've got big news today is that yesterday in my session with my therapist, after 2.5 years of going to him, we decided that the work is kind of done for now. That I'm saying I graduated therapy yesterday.
Yay!
And it's something that I thought I'm going to have a therapist for the rest of my life. Um, and I'm okay now though. He was kind of my training wheels, my crutches, whatever you want to call it. And I don't totally feel like I need that right now. And the last few sessions we've scaled back. I've gone less, and the last two I haven't really had that much to say. And even in the past, when it wasn't like, we need to work on this, we need to work on that, I still was like looking for some sort of validation. So I'm just telling him the good things I was doing. And then as we'd talk, there might be some stuff to come out of it. But the last couple of sessions was just like, hey, I don't know what to say. And, it was almost just bullshitting with my therapist. And I kind of loved it because I like the man. But we just decided that I'm paying for something that I probably don't need right now. And he'll be there in the future if and when it's time. Um, so yeah, I'm in a great place. And throughout my journey, one of my big things has been to kind of share my vulnerability. And I heard you talking about that last week, and to just be open and talk to people. And it's been kind of incredible. And I love what you do. And when I saw that you were looking for guests and I listened, I'm like, yeah, this is perfect. And so yeah, here I am.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. And then, yeah, thanks for reaching out. And, it's great that we were looking to connect and now you're here. Um, I went through my therapy graduation earlier this year too. I call it kind of like my therapy breakup. And it's probably the best kind of breakup you can have when your therapist is like, you know, I love seeing you, but there's no need to see you anymore. And I'm like, I that's a win.
Well, congratulations. It's an emotional thing. Um, when I left yesterday, and I say left, I was doing it remote. So when I logged off, I guess I texted a couple of very important friends of mine, and the only thing I could say is I feel so whole. Um,
Mhm.
I'm fulfilled, and there are feelings that I feel, and part of it is allowing myself to feel them, that I wasn't seeking them. I didn't know they existed. I didn't know that I had so much work to do. And to be honest, when I started therapy, my ex was someone who, and I'll say it pretty frankly at this point, is she abused me. I was with her for 18 years, married for 15, and she was always using her mental health as a way to control me, and or as a way to be an excuse. If I was going someplace, if we had plans, if she just needed to go for a drive that somehow lasted 4 hours because she's clearing her head, that was because of her mental health. So she weaponized it against me. And at the time, I didn't know she was using it. So when I started therapy, I'd been to my doctor recently and you know, talked about anxiety, because at that point she had actually not moved out, but she said she needed to go away for a while and wouldn't tell me where she was. There were times that she'd go 24 hours without contacting me, and I would think she might be dead. She was acting like someone who could harm herself. And I told my physician this, and she suggested that, well, maybe you starting therapy will model a behavior that she'd like to follow.
Mhm.
And if she can see the gains that you have, maybe that will be enough to get her to actually begin therapy. And then she also described me Lexapro. So I'm going to be very open here. I love medication for mental health, and I've learned. I mean, my anxiety at the time, when I thought that she could harm herself, and I did not know what she was doing to me, it was up to my eyeballs, and I couldn't breathe. And when I was medicated and started on Lexapro, my anxiety went back down to reasonable levels within 48 hours, I think. And some of that might have been placebo. It might take longer than that to work. And I'm not going to sit here and say that it's going to work for anyone else, but for me, it was a wonderful thing. and I self-medicated a little bit with some weed. Big advocate there, to be honest. Probably used it way too much. It wasn't prescribed or anything. It wasn't medical use, but that would also take my anxiety from from my eyeballs down to a reasonable level. So I started therapy, and people have even laughed at me. I had a guest on my show that thought it said something to the effect of, "Oh, that was cute. You thought you were, you were lying to yourself at the time, saying you're going for her." And maybe I don't know that it was so much a lie as just not knowing. But after about a month of therapy, I was like, "There's only certain things I can control, and it's not what she does."
Hmm.
And I started focusing on me. And once I started focusing on me, it's been it's been all uphill since then. I mean, there's setbacks, of course. Any kind of recovery is not linear, but I feel like I just keep reaching new milestones, and I'm at a place in my life now that I didn't even know existed 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago when I started.
It Growth and progress is definitely not linear, and I think the first time I went to therapy, I had gone to a good place. Great, we're on cloud nine. We've done the work in the healing, and then there might be pockets or periods of time where you feel like you trickle back or you have setbacks, and I took that super hard. Because I thought, like, well, I did all the work. I should be okay now. Like, I shouldn't be dealing with anxiety or depression. Why am I so depressed right now? And this and that. And I've had to learn to give myself grace for that and understand, we're human. There's gonna be moments where I just don't want to get out of bed for whatever reason. I don't even know. And it's okay. And just learning how to balance everything in my life of, okay, am I taking care of myself? Am I giving myself the time and space to rest, to decompress, recoup, whatever it is? Am I surrounding myself with people that are going to be supportive of my journey and my healing, or the ones that unfortunately either mock you, make fun of you, or use it against you? And once you get to that place where you kind of get to have clarity and kind of see above, sea level, like what's going on, that for me, that was a huge turning point.
Yeah. And I will say that I I know that there's going to be future moments that maybe I'll need therapy again. Maybe maybe I won't even know that I need therapy. I've noticed in my life that when I'm depressed, I don't usually recognize it until I'm coming out of it. So, that's something that I'm not going to say scares me, but it's something that I have in my mind. And I have to try to remind myself kind of the behaviors that are normal for me. And one that I talk about a lot is making a cup of coffee. When I'm depressed, making a cup of coffee is too much work for me. I I function, I go to work. I may not perform quite as well, but I still am able to get enough out of me to perform at a reasonable enough level, and people might not notice that I'm depressed. And I'm really good at masking, I think. I'm actually most of my life I was very shy and even quiet. And I've turned myself into someone who people think is an extrovert. I'm not. I'm just someone who can turn it on and off. And I do like to talk to people, but I like to have real communication with people. I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't understand about introverts and extroverts is I think that introverts a lot of times they don't care about the bullshit conversations, the small talk. We care about connecting with people. So it's easier to connect with a small group of people, while an extrovert has a large network, but it's often a large network of people that they can laugh with, share a drink with, do whatever. But at the end of the day, it's not as much of a commitment. It's not as tight of a friendship. And it's kind of funny because I do find myself having a lot of friends who are extroverts. And I've always questioned, like, why are these friends, why do they like me? Why are they friends with me when they've got so many friends? And I finally come to the realization it's because we can have those real conversations. And the superficial stuff, we have those too, but we have connected at a level that maybe they don't connect with their larger network.
Yeah, I'm the same way. The last episode I was recording, we're talking about being ambivert, and I would say I'm like an extroverted introvert. Yeah, I love meeting new people. If it's one on one like this, having a conversation, that's my thing. Especially when you're having a deep conversation. Oh, I live off of that. But if we're at a big function with just a bunch of people and there's it's just all small talk, I can hang because I grew up in an environment where I had to get used to that, but I'm going to be very drained and I'm going to want my space and I just want to go home and not go out and see anybody. Um, and that's been a big thing, I think, with like my mental health because I always was such a people pleaser and wanted to like anyone invited me to anything. Okay, let me do this. Let me double book a day so I can see as many people as I can. But then I would be so exhausted or burnt out at the end where I've had to realize like it's okay to like reel it back in and it's okay to say no to an offer to hang out or to whatever.
Yeah, and I think that what's really important is that self-awareness, because like a lot of times other people don't understand, and my tool for that has been to explain to people and just say, hey, Zyra, just so you understand, I'm a bit of an introvert. I love my house. I love sitting on my couch. That yellow thing behind me is super comfortable, and I'm very happy to be there. So I'm not going to say yes every time you invite me out. I might say no more times than I say yes, but I don't want you to think that has anything to do with how I feel about, our friendship or anything like that. And I've actually found that that's very helpful to people. It was awkward the first couple times I've said that to people, but I've got some longtime friends who have acknowledged that had I not said that early on, that they might have thought that something else. Like they might have thought that, we're just not that good of friends. Where for me, it was just a matter of I get exhausted by people, especially when I used to have to go downtown Chicago every day for work. I was taking a bus to a train to an office, and this office building is massive, and I'm around people all day, and I can enjoy being around people. And sometimes at this point in my life where I've been remote for 3 years, sometimes I do miss it, but that's for a day. Doing that every day was exhausting. And add on top of that now I realize that I was in an abusive relationship, that I didn't even have the energy to do to be the person I am today. And even with my good friends, sometimes one on one, it was too much because I was tired. And everything though has snowballed since this discovery, since starting this mental health journey, and I've learned about myself. And when you said before that there are times and you might need therapists again, or you might be depressed again, the one thing that I feel is different at this point than before is that I'm armed with a lot of tools,
Mm-hmm.
that I understand things. I understand me so much better. And I think that most people, I don't know if it's most people, but I'm going to say most people uh, don't have that self-awareness to the level that maybe they should, and to the
Mm-hmm.
level that you especially learn during therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there have been a lot of things in my life that haven't understood and just think I can't do that. Being organized, can't do it. But during this journey, I was actually diagnosed as ADHD. And that's nothing I ever suspected before in my life. And part of that was in school, I was a rules follower. I just kind of sat around and did what the teacher said. I didn't have that hyperactivity. I wasn't in trouble. I got straight A's back then. So a lot of times when you are succeeding or aren't misbehaving, they don't see something to diagnose or to even try to diagnose anything, because Scott's quiet but he does fine. And I got to college, and college was extraordinarily difficult for me because it was a whole different level. There were so many other distractions. Most of my lectures, the very first lecture I walked into was my Econ 100 class, and it was 750 people in an auditorium. The town I grew up in is 720 people.
Wait, for reference, my biggest class I've ever had was 100 people. And that was like an anomaly. So, oh, wow. Okay, I'm getting a picture now.
Yeah, and it was hard. And I have been making excuses for many years. And I wrote, I didn't even talk about these things with my therapist for a while, but I had a friend who got diagnosed ADHD. And before I even go any further on that, I'm going to say that talking about mental health and the vulnerability and all of this stuff has gotten me into so many wonderful conversations. And my friend was diagnosed ADHD just a couple, during this same time frame. And she started saying, I think that you may want to have an assessment. And when I brought it up to my therapist, he was like, yeah, there's a lot of overlap with anxiety and depression and ADHD. They all manifest and have similar symptoms. But when I started talking and telling him like the things that affect me or the things that, my friend had pointed out, and then he started asking me questions. And I remember that a lot of my answers were, well, let's talk about like note taking and studying. I was like, I'm 40 some years old at this point, 42 when we're 43 when we're having that conversation. And I was like, I can't take notes. I can't, like in meetings, I get distracted. I can't study. When I was in college, these were my problems. And I think that the fact that I brought up college, and that was over 20 years ago at that point, that he was like, oh, these are long time things. And since that diagnosis, I'm also on Adderall now, so plugging all the pharmaceuticals. And the first day I took it, I was like, I don't feel anything. Like, because some people abuse it, and I think actually feel something from them. One of my friends calls it legal cocaine, and maybe it's the dosage, but from what I understand, and I could be wrong on this, is that if your brain is, and I'm going to use air quotes right now and say normal, you might feel the high, whereas if your brain isn't working the same way, it just gets you to, again, air quotes, normal. And for me, that day, as kind of like, what is it's not working, whatever. Walked into my kitchen during lunch, and the dishwasher was done, and I pulled the dishes out of the dishwasher, put them away, started to walk away, and said, holy shit, what just happened? Because I'll put my dishes away, but I very well might have a bunch of them on the counter from, pulling them out of the dishwasher, eating, putting it on the counter, and holy shit, and now I've got a stack of plates here and a dishwasher that's not empty. So now is time that I empty it and put everything in. And sometimes that would mean that I'd have to run it immediately after I emptied it because I'd use so many dishes. But things like that have become so much easier. It hasn't fixed everything, but that just means that I have been able to attack other things by understanding myself and understanding the way my brain works and finding, people say life hacks. I hate that term. I just say that I find ways to set myself up for success.
You found another tool in your toolkit.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so reflecting back now, is there any moments growing up when you were younger? Because I know you mentioned during college and all that, but even younger where you can reflect like, oh, okay, that was ADHD symptoms showing.
Well, I think that, I think back to high school, okay? And I got straight A's, and I will say that high school was easy, too easy. And I've always kind of blamed, one of the things that I even said to my therapist is like, I've spent the last 25 years blaming high school being too easy for some of my problems. And it's like, I've had 25 years to learn these skills and I still haven't. It wasn't those 4 years of high school. So I was able to kind of fake it through high school and didn't realize I was faking it. But a lot of times I wouldn't do my homework, but I'd get to school early and copy somebody else's in the hallway. Or I would do it myself, but it would be in the hall before class. I'd take 10 minutes and say, what were we supposed to do? Because I would most of the time not even know what the assignments were. Um, but I'd get it done and turn it in, and then I'd get A's on all the tests or most of the tests, and it, everything seemed fine. But other than that, I haven't reflected all that much on it. I will say that I had a really hard time relating to people. Um, I consider part of that to be the environment, though, that I was in a farm town that was tiny, and my personality is different. I've wanted to be in a city since I was 10 years old. I remember when my dad had an interview in Denver, and I was so excited at the idea that we'd leave this farm town and go to a city. And I don't think many 10-year-olds get excited about the idea of moving from where they're at and being pulled from their schools. But I was so excited, but it didn't happen. So I lived there for my full 18 years growing up, going to high school, and then I was gone.
Mm-hmm. Kind of want to touch on, dealing with mental health when you're in school. And I so I started having anxiety and panic attacks my junior year of high school. So when I was like 15 or 16, and I missed so much school the last 2 years of high school just because I was terribly sick. And at the time, I didn't even know what was going on. I didn't know I was dealing with anxiety. And it had trickled into college, and even some days now working where I've had a panic attack and I cannot go to work, or even in the middle of a shift. Thankfully, I haven't had that in a long, long time, but it's kind of hard, and it makes it hard to relate to other kids on top of, just thinking a different way, having a different personality. Once you're struggling with something, and you might not be in the place where you feel comfortable to openly share what's going on. Like, I definitely was not. I was dealing with things at home, and no one really would understand why I was struggling with the things I was struggling, and it made me feel somewhat isolated. And the whole thing, like you said earlier, like putting a mask on, you just put a mask and you show up to school, and like, all good. Even now as an adult, sometimes you just like put a face on and that's it. But it can start weighing on you a little bit, and even like it trickles into just life, like relationships, friendships, where you end up kind of feeling there's like a disconnect.
Yeah, and I, I one of the reasons I like the name of your show, The Complex Like Wine, is because humans and just every day. I said this recently. I don't remember to who. It might have been on our podcast or it might have been somewhere else, but every day consists of hundreds, thousands, I don't know, just so many moments. I don't know how to define a moment, so I don't know how to count them either. But there are so many moments in a day that can have an impact on you, and it can affect the way you respond to someone. It can impact a decision you make that day. And that's one of the reasons that I try to tell people that regrets are a waste of time. And I know that that is very, very easy to say.
Hmm.
But the decision you made or the thing you said or did at that moment, there is a lot that went into what you said or what you did. And it could be everything from your entire life that preceded you and your life experience. It can be the bad day at work. It can be the test that you failed. It can be that you're distracted. It can be a lot of things. So we're all doing our best. And maybe sometimes we're not doing our best, right? But that's okay, because doing your best takes energy. And we've got a finite amount of energy. And trying to always do what's right, trying to be perfect, first of all, you're going to fail. But second, you're going to wear yourself out. And I, for one, don't have unlimited energy. And sometimes you've got to take the mask off. Sometimes you've got to, I shouldn't say you have to, but sometimes you're just going to react. And that's okay, as long as you are able to reflect on it, understand it, if you're willing to try to do your best. you should, as you said, and I say a lot, give yourself some grace.
Hmm.
And you're going to make mistakes, but that doesn't necessarily reflect who you are. It reflects all of the everything that's going on in your mind and your life. It could be your physical health, your mental health. It's going to be both of those, actually. Those both affect the way that you feel and decisions you make. So it's so complicated that there's not a fucking thing on this planet that's black and white. There's not.
No.
You've got to consider that in every interaction that's gone wrong or right, that there's reasons behind it.
Yeah. Thank you for liking the name of my podcast when I started it. I'm a big wine person. I worked at a winery, so it all relates. I was thinking that there's like complex wines, there's layers, there's depth, and that's literally us. No one is just basic or flat. Like there's something to somebody, whether they want to show it or not. And I love that you said the whole thing of with regret. I read this, I forget if it was just a quote that I saw or in a book, but it's the whole thing like people with anxiety are living with fear of the future, and then people with depression are living with fear of the past. And I definitely think a big part of my depression was all the regrets. What if I had done it differently? What if I didn't go to this thing? Or what if I hadn't engaged with this person or X, Y, and Z, whatever. Okay, like you can have a moment to acknowledge it and you're like, all right, I shouldn't do that anymore. Or well, we learned our lesson, we're not doing that again. Whatever it may be. But for me personally, I had to really sit with and just kind of be okay with, my past is my past. There's nothing I can do to change it now. It's written. So what am I going to do about it in the present? Am I going to just sulk, reflect, and just wish things were different? Or am I going to use that with my toolkit and do what I need to do when moving forward to be better about it? And that was one of the big things I reflected in therapy was all the past traumas of like, oh, was there any way to prevent any of this from happening? No. And, it's okay. But, we're now present in a safe space where everything's fine. So what can we do now to like enjoy the moment and move forward?
That's exactly right. I said earlier about my therapy journey, control the things you can control, and you can't control the past. Are there things that I could have done in my relationship? Could I have followed leads earlier? Could I have not gotten married? There's a lot, sure. But does that mean that I did something wrong or failed? Or I mean, no. And if I did do something that was wrong or failed at what I was trying to accomplish, so what? I can't do anything about that now. And I'll be honest that being 42 when all of this went down, there were moments that it was like, God, I was with her for 18 years. I could have had so much more of my life left. But I also think, holy shit, I'm pretty lucky. If this happened 10 years from now, then I'm in my 50s. Are the 50s bad? No. But I'm at a place in my life right now where I am financially secure. I've got a home. I've got a lot of things that are great in my life. I've got 3 cats, one of which is running around behind me. I've got a dog. We didn't have kids, which is great, given the scenario. And I've got a lot of my life ahead of me. And over the last 2 years, I've done a lot of really cool things. And, if you do, I'll plug it again. If you do listen to episode 1, that's called Want to Hear a Fucked Up Story on Positively Terrible. And I call it that because the first time I started telling people about it, that's how I had introduced it. I'd say, want to hear a fucked up story? And of course, the answer to that is almost always yes. But it was, I lost my train of thought. So I know the point wasn't to plug my stuff.
Oh, no, it's fine. It's a really good episode. And for people listening, Scott does a great job narrating it. Like, literally, my whole commute home, I was like, what the fuck? Like, is context, your ex-wife is has a lot of similarities to my mom, and so it some of it hit a chord to me of
Oh,
like,
wow.
wow, like some of these things that you were expressing, just the way like behavior and all that, like, no, I had to see that growing up. So to me it hit a personal chord. But for people listening, like, if you really want to hear a fucked up story, it's a pretty damn good one.
Well, thank you. And, um, so I guess where I was going with that though is that it took some time, and but I literally was thinking about this yesterday because, as I said, I graduated therapy. Is that my therapist? There are a bunch of things that I told him that I wanted to do. And again, coffee and listening to music were the starting points, the first steps. But I actually led with wanting to change the world, and I was like, I don't know what that means, but I feel so much so unfulfilled, so helpless, even that I want to do something that makes a difference. And then I said, well, I want to be like a mental health advocate. And I acknowledge that I don't know what a mental health advocate is. What does that even mean? And I said public speaking. And holy shit. I mean, I'm here with you. I'm doing this every week. And my next goal is to book some actual in front of an audience engagement. I'd love that
Mhm.
I get so much pleasure from it. And it took me a year and a half to get the podcast launched, and that was on the advice of my lawyer, not because of any of the stories or anything. And just so everyone's clear, the story is not about her, or the podcast is not about her or our relationship. Just one episode is about that. I interview people about the shit that they've been through, and in the end, it always ends up in a high note. Like, people are thriving. So um, it's so cool. And for you to sit here and say that it resonated with you, and for others to reach out, some people we don't know, some people, and when I say we, I've got a partner, Dan, who's on the podcast as well. And it's just incredible to hear people or get feedback from people that is like, oh, this is so great. I can relate to it. And another point that I'll make is that with you saying you witnessed this type of behavior, it's when it happens, a lot of people are like, how could I fall for this, or how did I get in this situation? But the way what I tell people is because, and we call our guests decent fucking humans, because I think there's a range of what a decent fucking human operates in. And when there are behaviors that fall outside of that, we don't expect that. We expect a range of good and bad, but we don't expect. My wife has a complete separate life, and actually two partners. Um, well, partner is a strong word. I will. You should. I'm never going to use that word to refer to her. Not for any of her relationships, because she clearly wasn't being a partner to anyone. But the point is that we expect people to operate in a certain range. And unfortunately, someone like you saw early on that that's not real. And there are people who operate outside of that. And I've found five people. So I tell my story a lot, and I did that out of survival. Um, because when you keep things in, you feel a lot of shame. And when I told someone in the first week after it happened, they told their wife. I'm friends with both of them. Their wife called me, and then we had a three-way call with her best friend, because her best friend went through very similar things, but even worse. And that had been a couple years for her since she started going through that, and hadn't really told anyone. And me talking about it made her open up, and her opening up made me realize I'm not alone. And now I've got a there have been four additional people after that, I think, who have heard me talk about this and have said, holy shit, Scott, I've got a very similar story. So it's kind of amazing that
Yeah.
there's so much of this out there. And just the act of talking about it has helped others feel okay with talking about it. Vulnerability and building community is pretty fucking incredible.
I think people get it twisted where they think vulnerability means weakness. On the contrary, it takes so much fucking courage. Like, and I I'm sure you can feel the same way, but when I started the podcast, I first was terrified because I'm like, all right, I'm going to put all of my personal business, my vulnerability is going to be all out there. And I've always struggled with vulnerability because, I had to grow up in an environment where, you put your walls up and you have to survive. And my first episode with a guest, we talked about sexual assault, and I was terrified to release that because it's a very vulnerable thing. It's traumatic and scary, and you don't know how people are going to react. But I was blown away with the different people that either called me or texted me DMs telling me their story, or that they felt relieved to hear somebody else went through something similar, and that they wanted to be on the podcast to share whether it was that story or something else. And that like that's the success of what we're doing. And I love that you said, the platform you created has now allowed other people to share. And it's so important that if you're harboring everything in, it can create shame, it can create resentment, depression, anxiety, harming yourself, life-ending thoughts, like the list goes on. But just having the courage to, acknowledge the shit that you're dealt with, the really bad deck of cards at times, but knowing, like that's not the deck of cards you have to hold on to. You can change, you can swap it out, and allowing other people to have that space where they can either come to you or even inspire them to come out themselves. It it's very cathartic, and every guest I've had on has always told me after, like, how cathartic it was for them, and it makes me emotional thinking about it. Like, if I was able to help in that in some way, like, it makes everything, any time I've been uncomfortable with sharing a story, it makes it all so worth it.
Right. And the amount of trust that people are giving you and me is, the first couple episodes when I interviewed people, I'd say, I felt awkward about saying that I'm honored and humbled that they're willing to tell me the story, but holy shit, why on earth should they trust me to handle their story? It's a lot of responsibility and care. And people are clearly getting enough from it that they're willing. And our last guest, so we've got probably 8 or so guests lined up coming up, and that sounds great until you get through 8 of them, and then you're like, who the hell is next? So she was one of the first. She was the first, I think, that neither of us knew. And I said, I asked her to tell her, I was like, tell the listeners what your experience is like, tell them why they should be on. And she said, it's such a safe space. And it's hard not to be emotional when I hear someone say something like that.
Mhm.
I mean, who the hell am I? I'm nobody. I just decided to talk, and I like to talk. So I decided to talk and have people listen. And, we're not a big podcast. We've only gotten 9 episodes out. Um, and when I put out a 90-minute episode and I've got 100 people listen to it or 100 downloads, that's like, holy shit. Think of the minutes. If you multiply that 100 listens by 90 minutes, how many hours of people's lives are given up to listen to what the fuck my podcast is doing?
Mhm.
I don't understand why people want to give us 5 minutes, let alone 90 minutes every week. And the fact that I haven't advertised or anything, and it's gotten to a place where we can reliably get 100 listens or downloads. Whatever. I hate the way the metrics work. Shocking to me. And it's like, okay, this is resonating with those people. That means they want it, they need it, they feel it. and we can reach such a bigger audience. And yes, there is a big part of that is like, oh yeah, I want to have a podcast that everybody knows, or I want to have a podcast that, oh, I can, maybe make a little money or at least break even on. Um, but that's not where I get the good feelings from. The good feelings is, holy shit, people care and people feel something. And when I hear somebody cried, that's kind of like the ultimate compliment. People tell me, "Oh, I cried at the last one," and it's like, "Holy shit, yeah, that's the best."
Yeah. Yeah, it oh God.
That smile you have, right? It says it all.
it
It's so fulfilling, isn't it?
it it makes, and I've said this in the podcast before. I literally was recording an episode last night with somebody, and he's been a huge supporter of the podcast since the get-go. And he started his own podcast, so had him on, and he was hyping me up. He was complimenting me, and I'm not really great with compliments, but it was nice to hear that someone recognizes the platform I'm putting out and that I'm trying to my best to create the safe space because I wasn't allowed that safe space as like a child. So how can I put something good out in the world? Yeah, and
Sure.
it's great that you also get to experience that too because man, it's it's amazing.
I mean, that smile you have right now says it all. It really does. And Zyra, I'm going to stop you for a second,
Mhm.
just because you said you're not good at taking compliments. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I get it. I absolutely get it. But you also mentioned giving yourself grace. I mean, treat yourself like you would treat others, and
Mhm.
you'd give people compliments. You would give people grace, accept their grace, but also accept their compliments. Okay.
No, thank you. That has been one of the things I've been trying to be much better at. And
Okay.
I think part of why, especially in the past where I've been not as graceful with compliments is,
Mhm.
as a creator, there's a little bit of the imposter syndrome. You downplay yourself in case someone else downplays you. And so
Sure.
it's like a proactive defense mechanism. And it's been one of the things this year with therapy where I realized, I'm allowed the compliment. I'm allowed the
Yes.
recognition. If someone's saying it, like it's because there's a reason for it.
Yep.
And I've done a lot of damn growth and work on myself to get to
Hmm.
where I'm at now. And so I have to acknowledge and compliment myself. Like, hey, like I did that.
Exactly. Now, don't tell me to take that advice because I will deflect your compliments too. But I am quick to tell people that, and I say I'm quick to tell people I am I do recognize that about myself, and I am trying to just say thank you or whatever. But I also am too quick with the joke to deflect also. So I'm working on that, and I'm not trying to just tell you to do something. Do what I do, not what I say, not what I do. I am also working on it, but you're doing something great here. I appreciate it, and I mean, first, thank you for letting me come on,
Oh yeah.
but you're doing great, and I think that honestly, I I don't want to. I know some people might hear this and think, oh, you're arrogant or whatever, but I feel like what we're doing kind of changes the world. And it might just be one person whose world it changes.
So that was my thought process going into it. Like, if I can at least help one person every episode, I've done my job. I don't care about the metrics. I don't care about the money. Like, that's all nice. That's a cherry on tops. Those are the additionals. Those aren't the necessities. And so the fact that I get to hear from at least one person every week, like, I love that point. I love that guess. Cool. Then I'm going to keep showing up.
No, it is a feeling that I can't describe. And to be at a place in my life where I feel proud and fulfilled. When I say that there was a life that I didn't know existed, those are the feelings that I didn't know existed. Is what it means to be fulfilled, what
Mhm.
it means to look forward to tomorrow. And I I'll even say that happiness was the meaning of happiness has changed for me. Before, being happy was, and I like to, kind of make a joke and say happiness was I saw a puppy that was cute across the street, didn't even pet it, but it was a cute dog, so that made me happy for the next 5 minutes. Or I'm a Cubs fan. Cubs won a baseball game. Oh, great, they won. I'm happy for the next 5 minutes. I didn't realize that you could have that you could have happiness like as a life attribute. And I'm not going to sit here and say I'm always happy. I mean, I'm not going to say that even if I go through a stretch that I'm not going to be depressed or whatever. But as of right now, I would consider my life happy. And I look forward to the day. I look forward to tomorrow. And even when I'm bored, I can sit down at my computer and do some things for the podcast, or I can go, take my dog on a walk. And I will say that the dog is relatively new. It's a year since I've gotten him. It's my first dog since I was probably 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
His name's Baloney, and he and I think that we're related for real. I got him because he's a low energy dog and I needed to kind of ease my way in. But he had experienced some extreme trauma in 2021. And he ended up at a shelter and he had a recovery that he needed to go through. And the online, of course, online, there's a company or an entity, I don't know what word to use, called We Rate Dogs, but they like have their Twitter account where they tweet out dogs and say 13 out of 10, he's such a good boy, or whatever.
That's adorable.
Yeah, it's this cute thing they do. But when he needed treatment, they raised $11,000 in 30 minutes for him just by tweeting him. So he was a mini celebrity, and it's shockingly, take him on walks, and I think 3 times I've had him almost a year. 3 times I've had people say, "Is that Baloney?" And they're not people I know. They knew him from his journey online.
That's crazy.
Pretty cool.
That's a really cool story. Thank you for sharing that.
For sure. I'll send some pictures if you want. Like,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's put some pictures and then if you're watching on Spotify or YouTube, I'm gonna include baloney on there.
okay.
Yeah. Any last minute things you want to share with the podcast? Any things that, like, since you graduate therapy, any things that you're gonna want to focus on in your growth for the rest of the year?
Um, for me, it's a matter of focusing on today, being present, and especially having ADHD and understanding that. It's I've wondered why it's been so hard to be present, and by being present, in the age of smartphones, it can be particularly hard to be present because you can hear that buzz of the text message that comes in and want to see it immediately, or you can decide to distract yourself from life by just surfing on your phone, going to TikTok. God, that TikTok reels on Insta, you can get sucked in a way that I've never been sucked in by anything before. It's ridiculous. So that's one of the big things that I'm just trying to focus on, is being present. But I will also say my physical health. It's kind of great the way. Well, I say great, but for better or worse, your physical health and mental health are so intertwined, and it's hard to take care of yourself mentally when you don't feel good physically. It's hard to take care of yourself physically when your mental health isn't good. I don't know if I just said the same thing twice or if I actually reversed it.
I
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm at a place right now where part of the reason I wanted a dog was to do more walks, and then he hurt his back, and then he got diagnosed with hypothyroidism. So he's one of the ones that has been gaining a ton of weight and can blame the thyroid on it. So we're getting that all fixed up, and we're gonna go on even more walks. But I have, in the last couple of months, I'm gonna brag for a second.
Do it.
And this wasn't 100% intentional, but I lost 18 pounds. And just this morning, so I don't care. You can look at me and see that I'm not a skinny guy. So I'll tell you that my goal for June, now that I had started losing weight, wanted to get under 240 pounds. So yesterday, last day of June, I weighed in at 230.0. So like I killed the goal.
Yes.
And honestly, the so this is all pandemic weight. I mean, I was never a skinny guy, but pandemic, depression, all of that, I gained a bunch. But understanding how I work with the ADHD, I would be working from home, so I'm not walking during the day. Um, and I recently realized that part of the problem is that I forget to eat. And then when you forget to eat, you get the fastest thing, which the fastest thing is never the healthiest.
Hmm.
And I put a fridge into my office. I am very lucky and privileged in everything that I can get an extra fridge. And I got a water cooler for my office. I got a coffee pot for my office so that everything I need is in my office. So when I realize that I didn't eat, I can turn around, grab something from that fridge, and be okay and not just like go to one of the apps and order something that's garbage.
Yeah.
And I'm also keeping like meal replacement shakes in there because those are they're fine. I don't care what I'm getting at that moment, but when I realize I didn't eat, I just need something in my belly. Um, so I've been using those not to lose weight, but just to be convenient, and it's snowballed. I started losing weight, and now I'm working out and all of that stuff. And then so that's the part I'm excited about. The other thing is the podcast, and we've got so much more planned. I just need more guests, and like I said, we've got a bunch, and it's cool to have a bunch, but it's going to be a scary day when we start getting down to the last few if I don't have a bunch more lined up. Um, but yeah, things are good, and I'm just looking forward to seeing whatever manifests the rest of the year.
Well, congrats to your weight goal and everything, and everything else. You're doing great. And again, thank you for being on the podcast. It was a pleasure to just have the Saturday afternoon to just chat with you. It's been great.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This is my first time being a guest, so it was cool. Thanks a lot.
Of course, yeah. And then people listening, I'm going to link his social medias, the podcast. I'm going to link everything. The first episode, if you want to hear a fucked up story, it's going to be all in the bios. That way you can go right after this, tune into that one. And again, if you haven't already, rate, subscribe, like, share with a friend. I would love to hear feedback if you have it for me. And I appreciate all of you so much. Again, thank you, Scott. And we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you.